thepascal. You are now rocking with that dude Pascal.
What's up? We have a new exclusive interview on Banfield with the Punisher. This is something we have got to see because let's be real. The Punisher's interview, okay, just so you know, he is an S worker that worked on these freak offs. He had a very interesting retelling of his experience with Cassie and Diddy. He apparently did these things for hours, definitely went back several times. He says up to about a dozen different times he was a part of these types of freak offs. But what's interesting about what he says in his testimony is, well, it kind of goes against a lot of the things that the prosecution, I'm sure, was hoping to be said from him, because they are claiming that Diddy was, plying people with substances, holding people against their will. But this particular guy, the Punisher, claims that those claims are not entirely true. That what he experienced is not what the prosecution, of course, is putting out there. That everything was consensual. There were no substances. He says there were no cameras in the room. There was nothing around. Everything was consensual, and everything aside from him being hired to do this act was pretty much legal. Everything else was legal except for what he was hired to do, because clearly, that is illegal, except for, from what I understand, Vegas, I think, is the only place that is legal. But anyway, it's not like I did my research on that, but you guys can tell me, isn't it Nevada? I think it's only Nevada in this country, but I digress. What's very interesting about this whole thing is what he's saying in this interview as well. There are things, there's a certain moment where I'm like, wait, why would he have him move around candles? Why would he have him do this, that, and the third just for the aesthetic for himself? Were the cameras really not in the room? Were substances really not used? Was he really not was Cassie really not being coerced into doing these things? Like I said, it's a very weird thing. But he did say a few things that was interesting before we get into this. Obviously, he was hired. He was asked to come in. Cassie was using an alias, a fake name. She opens the door with nothing but a robe and a wig on. She's not wearing a mask. So he starts to put two and two together, starts to do the math in his head. But one thing that was the one selling point was that apparently on the TV screen, it says, welcome, Mr. Combs. Welcome, Mr. Combs to this particular hotel that they were at. So he started to do the math. He said, oh, my Lord, this is Diddy. How did I get in this room, kind of thing, of course. And then, of course, he starts doing his research, looking on IG, and that's how he figures out that Cassie is the girl. And then, of course, that Diddy is the guy in the corner giving these directions. But what's interesting about this interview on Banfield, and shout out to Banfield for this interview, is just everything, the more details he gets into. And again, like I said, he's sitting there going, oh, no, we didn't do anything. All we did was hump. And it's almost as if he says, all we did was hump, read the Bible, and drink Perrier. That's what we did. That's all we did. We were clean. We were good. We didn't do nothing. Even in his testimony, he's like, yeah, there was some trees, there was sometimes some trees every once in a while, but I never inhaled, that Bill Clinton thing, right? Like, I've seen it. I've had it, but I've never inhaled, right? So we've heard all that BS before, right? Now we're hearing it again from this S worker who's sitting here saying, nope, never partied, never partook in any type of party favors. All I did was hump. In fact, half of the time I had a hard time. Get it? Half the time he couldn't really rise to the occasion, if you get what I'm saying. So much that he has a book coming out about ED, right? And he says it's like a comedy book or something like that, throwing some humor in the stuff. Whatever it may be, it's a very interesting testimony nonetheless. I thought it was a parody of a testimony when you read the transcript. Now, he comes on to Banfield and he goes into more detail about this. So we've got to take a look at this interview. I sped up the interview because it is quite lengthy, unlike him. But we got to get into this conversation. It's a joke. I'm sorry. It's just a straight up joke. But let's get into this. I think this is very interesting. So let's take a listen.
A man who goes by the name, wait for it, The Punisher. The Punisher is an exotic dancer and former sex worker whose real name is Sheree Hayes. Mr. Hayes told the jury that he got his nickname playing basketball, but his photos, they seem to tell a different story for why he may be using that name today. Ooh, kind of safe for work, almost not safe for work. I wouldn't put it up at work, but that's the Punisher, y'all. Mr. Punisher testified that he was hired by Diddy and Cassie for 8 to 12 different times, things like episodes, and he was meant to create a sexy scene that would last for hours. He said that Diddy called all the shots in these episodes. He didn't call them freak-offs, but he described what we've heard as freak-offs. He never saw any cameras, he said. He didn't see any violence. And he said, although Cassie would sometimes wince or sigh at some of the sex directions that came from Diddy, he said it didn't seem as though Cassie was there against her will.
Now, here's the thing. You're going to hear in this interview a lot of that, where he's like, I didn't see anything. Everything was consensual. There were no cameras. There was no substances. There was no, coercion of any type, right? Now, I feel like a lot of people are going to be wondering, is he telling the truth? Or is he saying something different out of fear of retaliation? Is he getting paid off? Is this witness tampering potentially? And all that. I don't know about all that. But it is very interesting that prosecution would have him come up to the stand and say all of this if they were expecting him. Like, I feel like they were bringing him up, expecting him to say, yeah, there were cameras everywhere. There were substances everywhere. It was an absolute cluster F. Yes, she was forced to do things. She was teary-eyed the entire time, and it was absolutely terrible. Yet he doesn't say that at all. He says, yeah, everything was different. We were just drinking tea and talking about, you know what I mean? Talk about the birds and the bees while we were doing the birds and the bees. You feel me? So I don't know. It just seems a little bit odd to me.
Again, this is a prosecution witness, so that's kind of, that's on the fence there. He does certainly corroborate the freak-offs and what happened in the freak-offs, but that whole business about, to him, he wasn't sure if Cassie was into it or not, but he did hear that she winced and that she sighed as Diddy gave a lot of those directions. By the way, the Punisher also said that he never saw Diddy take drugs, never saw that he seemed drunk or high, which is exactly what prosecutors are trying to show, that this was not just an out-of-control, party of an enlisted megastar, but instead was a clear-eyed criminal enterprise. And I mentioned it off the top of the show, so I'm happy now to introduce the man who spent the better part of today on the witness stand. Sheree, the Punisher Hayes, joins me now live. Mr. Hayes, it's really good of you to be here. Thank you so much for doing this. I can imagine you've had a hell of a day.
Definitely a challenging day today.
So tell me a little bit about it. Like, how was it? How'd you feel up there? Like, give me a summary and a description of what that day was like for you.
What's interesting is like those questions I feel like are questions Cassie asked after the freak off. Did you have fun? Did you have a good time? Because you know what I mean? It's like, we'd like to have you come back again. You know what I mean? But this is very interesting.
Well, it's very nerve-wracking. There's nothing you can do to really prepare yourself for that type of environment. Very tense scenario, very serious atmosphere, and I just kept a mind frame of from the time I've been contacted by investigators. It's just give my version of the truth, what I can remember to the best of my ability, and that's what I tried to do today.
So I know that you talked about this on the stand, but I want to just sort of flesh it out with you a little, because we get court sketches. There's no cameras in court, so it's really good to have you in person. When you say that it was clear that Diddy was directing the sex scenes and the sex acts, because as you described, it started off as just a sexy scene, but it progressed into actual sex over the course of the freak-offs. What kind of direction did you get the sense? Like aggressive, mean, demanding, or just, hey, this is kinky, let's do this?
Not even as I described in the text. They were very subtle. Mr. Combs was always basically across the room, and it would be in a low tone, and it would just be suggestive. It was nothing aggressive, nothing that would create some sort of scenario that this was like unnatural between them. Obviously, a sexual scenario with a couple is not the norm, but it's something that I had heard about before, and there's some couples that get into this, and in hindsight, if there were no accusations, I would have saw it as completely natural.
Can you repeat that? You would have seen it as what?
If there was no accusations, like in hindsight, all this stuff is in hindsight. Like in the moment, I didn't see it as anything but a couple doing something risque, and Cassie as a partner trying to create a fantasy for who I believe was her husband, and for the majority of this.
You know what's interesting about that is that, okay, first off, he's saying that Diddy was being very kind of soft spoken with his suggestions, not his demands. Of course, he's sitting there going, saying, "Hey, it was completely consensual. It was just three adults just having a good time and role playing and doing what they doing. Okay, keeping it kinky and keeping it spicy." I don't know. You know, the way that we've heard Cassie describe a lot of it. Yes, it sounds terrible, but I will also say this: just because she had a lot of terrible ones where she was made to do certain things doesn't mean that she didn't have some that she actually did enjoy doing, right? Maybe in the very beginning, or maybe it ebbed and flowed, right? Some days she enjoyed what she was doing, and some days she absolutely hated it. That is very possible. But then at the same time, never underestimate the power of people's memory, right? Maybe he remembers it to be a joyful and fun event, whereas Cassie, it was absolute torture and absolute hell for her. That could still be very true. You also got to remember too, as soon as he realized that he is sitting there bumping uglies with superstars, I'm sure his mindset was a little bit different. Holy cow, I'm doing this stuff and I'm performing in front of Diddy. I'm doing this, and this with Cassie, a beautiful artist. You know what I mean? I could see that perspective creeping into somebody's mind in that way too. Now, I'm not trying to belittle or, downsize what he experienced. Okay. I'm not trying to downplay what he experienced, but at the same time, those things you can put into consideration as well. Again, though, he could have very much just had a great time between all three of them. It could literally have been a sober experience the entire time, and that's it. But he did say in his testimony about smoking them dumb trees, okay? So I don't know about all that. If he says there's no substances in the room, yet that Mary Jane was in the room, technically Mary Jane is considered a substance. So what is it? You see what I'm saying? So again, and then there's something that he says here later on that I'm still trying to figure out. Does he say candles or is he saying camera? Because he says he claims in the very beginning of this interview that there are no cameras, no substances, and nothing was coerced, right? But then he says Diddy was asking and it sounds like he's saying camera to the left or move it a little bit further this way. I don't know if he's saying candles or cameras, but that if it is cameras, then it would definitely contradict what he's claiming in his testimony and, of course, what he's saying here in this interview. But let's continue.
So at one point in your testimony, I think you mentioned, and I was just reading transcript because, of course, there's no cameras. You mentioned that Sean Combs was slightly aggressive in his tone and that Cassie would sigh or wince at some of his direction. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I understand that you're getting it in parts. It was quite a long testimony. When the sighing and the wincing was associated with some of the direction was very specific, and it could be one after the other in terms of move the candle to the left, move it a little more, move it a little more, and now move your body a little more, stuff like that. And it was kind of unnatural for a scenario where you're trying to create a sexual situation. So my understanding or my interpretation of it in the moment was frustration with the repeated directions.
Okay. I will say this too. Yeah, frustration with the repeated directions, but also at the same time, if you've been bumping uglies for 3 days straight, yeah, I'm going to be a little tired too. Okay. I mean, it's like you're having, do nonstop all day, every day for 3-4 days nonstop with no breaks. Real talk. I'd be tired. I'd be really annoyed. I'd be sore, all that stuff. So yeah, I'd be wincing and sighing too. You want me to do what? He's like, yeah, I want you to move from that position into the scorpion position. And I want you to hold that. But I need you also to put more baby oil on. All right. I'd be annoyed. Day 3, I'd be like, all right, bruh, you serious? We've been holding this position for 3 hours. I'm tired. I need some Chick-fil-A and a nap. You know what I'm saying? So again, there's something weird about this. And then also on top of that, he says apparently from what Banfield's saying that Diddy was saying things aggressively, but he says earlier, oh, it was calm. It was suggestions, low toned suggestions. So then what is it, right?
So it felt to you when you were there like it was frustration, but it did not feel to you when you were there like she did not want to be in the situation she was in with you.
It did not.
The other question I have for you is, I think I read that this began in was it right, 2012, that the first time you were hired?
That's correct.
So that would seem fairly early on, perhaps in the Free Cops in their relationship, and it felt to me like in the beginning you did not actually have any kind of sex with Cassie in front of Diddy in those hotel rooms. It was just performative, but that it graduated in the later Free Cops to sexual acts. Did it seem to you, now that you're hearing a lot more of the story, that this was the beginning of the whole Freak Off adventure for them, that they were kind of figuring it out themselves as well, and that maybe it progressed a lot further and got a lot less appealing to Cassie, maybe later after you had moved on and weren't in the picture?
Good question. Again, could he have been one of the first guys, like the first pancake, trying things out, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't? Of course, maybe at that time she was all about it, right? She was about it big time. And then later on, maybe she didn't want to do it no more. Like I said, it happens. That does happen. Okay. But like I said, as soon as that person says no, you need to stop. That's when it turns into something illegal.
So I'm instructed to not necessarily follow any of the details. So I just really know what my interaction with was. And it was always like almost a start over scenario, because like I said in my testimony, it wasn't consistent. I would get called maybe once every 4 months. So long periods of time would go in between. So it would definitely be kind of like an odd situation, but not in a way where I can assess. There was some sort of progression that went on from the time we started to the time we ended. It was pretty consistent all the way through.
Interesting.
Well, may I commend you in following the orders of the court and not having consumed a lot of information about this before your testimony, because that would have been an easy question for you to answer had you known all the background, right, that we're all learning in court. So congratulations and good for you. You're a model witness, and I appreciate you doing that. That's true justice. I do want to press a little bit on this aspect of from the first Free Cough until the last Free Cough that you did you sense that they were getting more practiced at it, and that it was a lot more sexual right away? First it was performative and just, a show, and then it became actual sex towards the end. Was there anything different between episode 1 and say episode, maybe maximum 12? That seems to be the max number that you performed with them. Did 12 seem a lot more, like it was a machine that was ready to go?
Actually, the opposite. It was very routine, like a very consistent routine. It always started the same, some sort of a scenario where we would be across from each other on couches that were covered with sheets. It always had to start with a baby oil, with me rubbing it on myself, her doing the same, escalating to us rubbing each other, and then escalating into small sex acts, leading into actual penetration. It's very methodical and pretty much the same. I can't say there was a different energy from start to finish. It pretty much stayed the course of whatever the criteria was from the first time going forward. And the first time was actually the only time there was an actual sexual interaction. And it was offered, as I said in my testimony, but I declined.
So one of the other escorts.
Wait a second. Did he just say that there was no hibbity dibbity until except for the first time? Wait, hold on.
Stayed the course of whatever the criteria was from the first time going forward. And the first time was actually the only time there was an actual sexual interaction. And it was offered, as I said in my testimony, but I declined.
So they offered, they said, if you want to, you can, right? With Cassie, and that didn't happen. So every other time it's just been what, a pantomime, the acting like it was just basically dry humping or something like that. That seems a little bit weird. Something, like I said, something's weird about his interview. Something's weird about this interview. Something's weird about his testimony. It feels like we're not getting the full truth here. But again, I'm just side-eyeing it because it just seems weird that prosecution would bring in a guy who they feel is going to be like, oh yeah, he's going to be, one of the nails in the coffin. And then they bring him up and he's like, yeah, there were no cameras, there were no substances, she had a great time. It just seems a little bit weird to me, don't you think? And then now he's saying, no, nothing progressed into into anything, spicy in that way. I didn't use the equipment down there, in that way, only except for the first time. And maybe it's seriously solely because of his ED. He could not rise to the occasion. Maybe that's what the reason was. And they said, well, we like the way he looks. We're just going to have him do this act, and that's it. No, getting, nothing further, nothing X-rated from this point on. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. This seems, like I said, seems odd. But he even said, there were trees, like we were smoking. I was offered it, but I did the Bill Clinton. It's like I said, something seems weird about this, guys.
So one of the other escorts who had done some of the same things in these freak-offs that you were hired for said that at one point Sean Combs was very violent with Cassie, and that he took her in the other room, and that he heard slapping and beating, and that when they came out, Diddy wanted them to continue and finish strong. That was his words, apparently, allegedly, finish strong. But that the male escort couldn't. He said, I had erectile dysfunction at that point because of what I'd gone through. And I know, like, you wrote a whole book called In Search of Freezer Meat about that, about erectile dysfunction and how difficult it can be. And I think you might have mentioned that it actually happened to you during one of your freak-offs with Diddy and Cassie, that you had the same kind of issue. Was it at all based on violence or aggression?
I'm sorry. We gotta take a look at this. Real talk. In Search of Freezer Meat. No, this is not a joke. Okay, but literally a story of the male mental health crisis caused by ED, and the only true cure no one is talking about. And he's talking about an implant down there. Real talk. And then, of course, you got the guy looking in the freezer going, where's my meat? Based on a true struggle, it says on the bottom. And then, of course, she the girl sitting on the bed says, he must not be into me, thinking that in her head. This is the weird, man. Like I said, this is real. This is real. This is real. He really did write a book called that.
No, it was not. It was not based on violence and aggression. I think for me, there was no true, at times, for me, I could not get into a place of intimate connection. There was always a discomfort with, obviously, a male partner just being present, period. And then, like I said, with the direction, the move to the left, the move to the right, to do this, to do that, in terms of me maintaining like an erotic space of being turned on or whatever, it was difficult. So it was just more of, it felt like acting opposed to a actual natural sexual scenario.
You see that. So he's sitting there going, I could not rise to the occasion solely because there was another man in the room. I could not do that. It was weird. I couldn't handle that. I wasn't cool with all that. I was cool with being with her. I was cool with lathering the baby oil. I was cool with doing everything else. But as soon as they asked me to do anything of the sort with another person in the room, especially a man, I couldn't do it. I could not stand at attention. Now, I'm wondering about that, because that seems a little bit odd too, don't you think? Like, but I don't know. I mean, obviously, he wrote a doggone book about this as well. So again, maybe it is 110% the truth, but he still kept going back. He still kept going back. If he had a problem with it, he wouldn't have gone back. You see what I'm saying? So again, it seems a little bit weird, unless, and this is what defense tried to put together, okay, and accuse him of, like that he actually was developing some sort of feelings for Cassie as well over a course of time. That's what they're alleging as well. And he's like, nah, you guys got it all wrong. I did not have feelings for her. But at the same time, I mean, if you're doing stuff like that on a continuous basis, on a continual basis, and you're with someone like Cassie physically in that intimate type of way, I mean, I can see people catching feelings. I can see that happening. All right. But again, you got to remember, once again, he kept going back. So if he had a problem with this, he could have refused to go back and do more things with them. But he did it over almost, well, they say a total of a dozen times. So he didn't have a problem for all those 12 times, y'all. Just something to think about.
Did you ever know another escort by the name of Jules in LA?
The truth of the matter is, I was in a naive state. My very first interaction, I was told it was, she went by Janet. I had no idea who they were. And she introduced herself as Janet and said this was her birthday and this was something special her and her husband was doing. So the majority of the time, actually the entire time, even when I found out who they were initially, I really believed I was the only guy they were involved with. I thought this was
But had you ever heard of had you ever heard of an escort named Jules?
I have not. I'm not in the male escort business. I'm actually a stripper that took a proposition, but it's not somebody I would commingle with in terms of interactions.
And then last quick question, sir. Did they offer you, did the feds offer you immunity at all at any step of the way as they were, prepping you to be a witness for this trial?
No, there was no talk of immunity of anything. From what I understood, I was not charged with any crime or there was any issue where I would need immunity in regards to this matter.
Sheree Hayes, I can't thank you enough for being so forthcoming and candid and agreeing to talk to me on this program tonight. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate you walking into federal court and getting up on a witness stand and talking about stuff that's pretty uncomfortable. The justice system relies on witnesses being fair and truthful and doing what you did, no matter how hard it is. And it is real hard. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, my pleasure. I appreciate you having me, and thank you so much.
Some seems, okay. Now that we saw the whole interview, and of course, shout out to News Nation, shout out to Banfield for the great interview. But there's something about this that it just feels weird to me, y'all. It does. Even his testimony felt weird. Like I said, why would prosecution bring him in if they thought he was going to answer all those questions the way that he answered? Oh, there was nothing. There was no cameras. There was no substances. That no one was coerced. Why would you bring him up? Except to say that, yeah, he was running everything. He directed. He made suggestions. He directed all the things. He choreographed all that we were doing in these freak offs. Sure, it's nice to have that information for sure. But outside of that, it's like, well, everything was consensual. That's how I'm looking at it. In his perspective, in the Punisher's perspective, this whole thing was consensual. That Cassie was having a good time, and that's it. Yeah, she would wince and sigh if Diddy would be like, yeah, I want you to do this, and then while doing that, I want you to hold one of these candles, or I want you to pour some wax on his body, stuff like that. While you're in this position, I can see something like that where you're just like, I am just tired and I just want to stop. I can see that part, but he's not saying any of that at all either. Then also on top of that, he says, yeah, there was no intimacy in that type of way. It didn't go any further than them actually going through the acts of certain things. That it was basically theater, okay? Like doggone kabuki theater up in this mug, okay? With baby oil, all right? And that's it, right? So again, so the way he is talking about it just seems a bit odd to me. That's just my personal opinion. Something just seems weird. If we bring him on bring him to the stand, please bring in the Punisher. He sits down, he gives this scathing account, but it's not scathing at all. It's just him being like, yeah, we had relations. Well, we didn't. We just got, we just rolled all over each other's bodies. Lathered in baby oil as Diddy is watching in the corner, right? And telling them to move candles left and right. And that's it. That seems a little bit weird, don't you think? Now, of course, I'm glad that Ashley Banfield asked this question near the end, which is, did you have a deal with the prosecution? That, did you get some sort of deal so that you can speak? Immunity. So you can speak freely without fear of getting caught or fear of getting charged with any type of crime. And he says, no, I never got any deal with prosecution. So that could also be another reason why maybe he's not telling everything. Maybe he could be telling everything. He could be telling the absolute truth on everything. But something seems a little bit disjointed in my personal opinion. Something seems to be not fully correct here. Okay, like I said, even in the transcripts that have been written during his testimony, he says, yeah, there were no substances, but from time to time there was some Mary Jane, And no, I just Bill Clinton did. So in other words, he didn't inhale. So if you're saying that there were no substances at the parties, but then you say that there was Mary Jane, that's the substance. Last I checked. Yes, I know it's legal in parts of America, but still, it's still considered a substance. And at that time, when he was allegedly having it in his possession, it was during a time when things were illegal. So it does make you wonder if now there was that substance there, does it mean that possibly that there was cameras there too? Like I said, something seems weird about his testimony, and I'm going to be, I'm he came through. He did say that he was hired. He did have these events with Cassie, and at least you got that piece. At least you could see that part. Okay. Now it's going to be up to the judge and jury. It's going to be up to the jury to make a decision on if this testimony that he had is impactful enough to put Diddy behind bars forever or not. That's something that's going to be interesting. But like I said, he said, oh, no, it wasn't aggressive. It was just suggested directions. Very interesting, guys. Again, I'm side-eyeing it a little bit. That's just my thoughts. But comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Hit that like button down below. Crush that subscribe button. And now you'll be seeing me in a little bit because I will be live a lot earlier today covering the Diddy trial for sure. So get ready because we got a lot going on today. Kid Cudi may be on the stand today, and I'm here for it. Anyway, comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Hit that like button down below. Crush that subscribe button, and we'll talk here soon. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another. This is the Pascal Show. Bye.
Pascal. You are now rocking with that dude Pascal. We be going wild.